Welcome back to Exceptional Talk with Dr. Clark. I have an exceptional guest today. His name is Coach Bobby Bynam. And let me just tell you a little bit about him before I actually start to talk with you. Um, Coach Bynam was a pre-med biology concentration in physiology at West Georgia University, and he did an add-on in engineering for transportation technology. He is a Georgia Professional Standards certified teacher in 6 through 12 general content knowledge in science, and also advanced placement certification in physics. So y'all, you see he got a lot under his belt. Also, he has a master's in post-secondary education from Troy University, and he has been teaching in education for 15 years. Thank you so much, Coach Bynam, for joining me here today. I appreciate you taking out your time.
Yes, ma'am. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, absolutely. So you are going to share with my audience today a little bit about vaccines and why is it important, and just what it is they need to know when it comes to vaccination. So I'm going to go ahead and let you get started, and I know that my listeners won't be disappointed at all.
Yes, ma'am. I hope not. Well, I'd like to start by saying that, my purpose for being here is to just make sure that your audience that have opportunity to see this make informed decisions. So it's not a conversation per se to try to convince anybody to do anything contrary to what they probably believe. However, in light of what we're dealing with this pandemic, it's kind of playing second fiddle. Science has always been the science, but what we're confronted with now is a pandemic of misinformation. So essentially what we're dealing with is people don't know what to believe because there's just a plethora of information that, comes through us from all directions via the internet.
And all these myths. Yes.
Yes, ma'am. And so, again, I'm not trying to convince any audience member, but just state the facts so that when whatever decision that you make it in light of, good information or good science. Okay, because that in essence is the only objectivity that we have in this conversation. And so we're trying to approach this from an objective standpoint, if you will.
Absolutely.
Yes, ma'am. So I guess if I want to communicate to your audience, there's 2 points that I want to make. I want to address some of the most renowned issues as far as the misinformation pandemic. What things are people most this bubble or this echo chamber that we find ourselves in, and then the second thing, just giving you a textbook definition of vaccines and what purpose do they serve. Okay, so I'll begin with just the misinformation. So when we turn on our social media and whatnot, we get an abundance of that. Now, this is not an issue that we have not been confronted with, not even on a global scale. So it's something that we've confronted before. So it has informed us from past experience, shall I say, has informed us on how we move forward with the pandemic now, right? We've seen this before. So it stands to reason that we would have some information on how to approach a solution to the problem. And so, but what we didn't count on was the advent of social media. Okay, anybody can put any type of unvetted information, and we simply don't know what to believe. Mm-hmm. So we want to retreat to our echo chambers, this bubble we create around ourselves of information that we already agree with, and we use this echo chamber to kind of confirm and reinforce what we already believe. So we're not open to hearing the other side of the argument. Mm-hmm. Right? I like to teach my students that all information does have value, whether it be right or wrong. Right. But what we have to do is when we speak to each other, we have to come from first a point of compassion. I understand your point, and that the point that you're making has validity, right? But we cannot, I guess, be in the business of co-signing when we know better or we know the information that is better. We have to be just as loud as people that are putting the wrong information out.
Right.
So that's what I hope we gather from this conversation.
Absolutely.
Right. Ma'am. Yeah.
I was just saying,
And
absolutely. That's what we want to gain, for them to value this information. Because when I first heard it, you gave me a whole nother view. You gave me a whole nother mindset on how to view this vaccination and this vaccines and just the whole concept of it. So I just felt that it was only necessary for them to hear. So I'm gonna let you continue on. Can you hear me, Coach? Okay.
Yes, thank you. I hear just fine. Just fine. But per our conversation that we had earlier, the point that I was trying to make was to give you kind of a textbook explanation of how vaccines work. Okay, not so as to take away the credibility of any other sources that may mislead us as far as our understanding of vaccines. So here it is. A vaccine, fact, does not cure diseases, okay? And we oftentimes get vaccines confused with the term cure, so we have to be clear on the verbiage that we use when we have these conversations. Bacterial infections have cures because they're alive and therefore they can be killed. Viruses do not follow the biological principles of grace, which is growth, reproduction, adaptation, cell, and energy, right? So the way that sets them apart from a living organism like a bacteria is that they're not alive in the first place, so we can't kill it. And what it has in common with a bacteria is that it is a pathogen and kind of invades the body through similar vehicles, right? So that kind of muddies the conversation, because we at the basal level think that whenever we're confronted with a pathogen, then we just come up with a cure to cure. But not all inflictions on the bodies can be treated the same. It just depends on what their origins are. So the purpose of a virus is for it to use its mechanisms to invade at the cellular level the organism or the host, right? And it uses the machinery, if you will, of the cell to make copies of itself. So if I had to give you an example, it's like you have a print shop and you put out certain flyers, okay? I don't have a print shop, okay? So your shop being the cell, I would have to come into your shop where your equipment that you use to make your flyers or whatever print media that you use. Then I would take over your printer in your shop to print my flyer. Gotcha. Because I can't print it on my own. All right. And then once I have done that, then I exit with all the information that I wanted to make copies of. Then I just start to go from print shop to print shop to print shop, making copies of my print media. And then that's how I get my message out into the community or into the world, if you will. Right? So that's what viruses do.
So the viruses are finding these hosts one after the other and attaching on to that host, and then getting stronger and able to go on and on and on. Oh wow, it's amazing.
Yes, ma'am.
It was a movie years ago came out called Contagion, I believe. Was similar to that this virus will look for a host, and once it acquired that host, it would only be there for a while before it would look for a new host. So it's you said host, I just thought about that movie, but wow. But this is very, very important to know.
Yes, ma'am. But that's I guess that's an example of, yes, ma'am. And that's art imitating life. I would imagine the inspiration for that film came from just looking at how a pathogen like a virus behaves. Another comparison, just to drive home the point, we could compare one virus to another virus as opposed to comparing a virus to a bacteria, right? So we've always had this technology because we've already encountered viruses before, and we know how viruses behave because we've encountered others. I mean, we've encountered AIDS, for example, HIV, meningitis, rhinoviruses, which cause the common cold. So we've encountered these things. Since they use the same mechanism as the novel coronavirus does, because it falls into that category, then past experiences have informed us and given us the ability to be able to treat individuals at an accelerated rate comparatively speaking, from the past. And so that speaks to those that would be reluctant to take the vaccine, if you will, because they're concerned about how fast.
Oh wow! I'm having
this miracle drug.
Yeah, I'm having some technical difficulties, Coach Bynam, and I hate that because we're missing so much good information, and we can still hear you, but you'll freeze up for a few minutes. But we're gonna get through this.
Okay.
I don't want them to miss anything.
Yeah, yes, we will. Yes, ma'am. Yes, we will. I trust we will. Yes, ma'am. And so, one of the misconceptions that came from as the misunderstandings that we carry about vaccine technology and how we approach this particular pandemic can be attributed to the way. So, for example, or they use terms like accelerate, or they have it, or they're skipping certain steps when it comes to producing medications and vaccines and getting them ready for the public, right? So that raises a red flag to us, right? So the closest thing that I can come up with as far as an example to make us more comfortable with the idea that these vaccines were in fact created at an accelerated rate would be the foods that we eat. Like, let's say produce in the supermarket that are labeled organic, right? Organic foods and our foods that follow our conventional ways of being processed are generally the same, but they'll add maybe one or more steps to the organic criteria, which is set by someone, and so that way you can attach that label of organic to it. But up to a certain degree, both non-organic and things labeled organic have to follow the exact same criteria, right? So if we could apply that to what we're dealing with as far as our, being comfortable with this being developed at an accelerated rate, understand that one, the technology has advanced from, let's say, the early days of vaccine technology to 2020, 2021, right? However, legislation or the rules that govern how we present this to the public have not changed.
Right.
So technically, yes, by that metric, this vaccine came at an accelerated rate. We could also submit that perhaps we believe that is because the legislation that govern how we present this to the public has not kept up with the technology. So, we have to look at it through that thing. And when we look at the media, I don't think that to a degree that the media wants to be purposely misleading the people. They just present what they know. But I think that we'd be remiss to just to take the way that it's being reported to us as gospel, if you will. It's not. They're just taking the information and presenting it, through a single lens, and that lens is not a scientific lens. They're taking information from the scientific community and trying to put it in a way that makes the rest of us understand, and they're missing details that are critical, And so in missing those details, now we have these red flags that are going up. and I think that's important. And so I just think we should take when we are confronted with information, we should always look at this through kind of a scientific smell test, because that's an objective way of looking at things, regardless of what our politics are or what our points of view are. Ask questions. That's great. I would, invite your audience to review this video
Right.
and to
Ask
ask
questions.
questions to that.
Absolutely. I'll definitely
Yeah.
do that.
Yes, ma'am. Definitely ask questions.
Yeah.
Because I'm not infallible. I don't know it all. I just think that I am versed in this particular issue.
Right. And you've had the actual study. You were a pre-med major, so you had opportunity to learn the various pathogens and how they operate. But let me just ask Coach Bynam, is it safe to say that, and I don't want to use the word safe, so let me just take that word out. Could I possibly say that this could be similar to when we were getting vaccinations before? And I do understand that you said that this one was at an accelerated rate. However, the technology is more advanced, which does allow us or allow them to be able to produce these in a more of accelerated rate. But can you kind of explain the comparison? And I think you mentioned that at the school, the comparison when you talked about the vaccinations we used to get as children, for the various measles and chicken pox and all of those. Can you kind of compare those two?
Okay, so let me make sure I understand your question. You're asking me to draw a comparison between the vaccines for pathogens we're familiar with, like measles, mumps,
Right.
polio, versus the COVID.
Right. Yeah, because you
Okay.
kind of touched on it at the school, because you were talking about how people were so fearful of this vaccine now. And we do have to realize that we didn't know what was in those vaccines back then, when our parents were taking us to the doctor and having us get all these various vaccinations. And even when I went to college, before I went to college, I had to get another one. So kind of compare that and see, so we can kind of see a little more in depth about the differences or the similarities, if you
Okay.
will.
Yes, ma'am. I do my best. So when we compare, the question to me is a question of history, our history with vaccines, right? So that raises another issue with us, because the populace, especially the African American experience with the medical community in the United States, is not squeaky clean. I.e. the Tuskegee experiments and all of these things. So those of us that are apprehensive, that are on the left side of this particular topic, that is the call, that is the rallying cry, where we don't trust this community to present us with something that is beneficial for our population, for our community.
Right.
So the way that I would speak to that is that, although still not perfect, I would like to believe that we are a much different country than what we were in the 1940s and 50s, where something like the Tuskegee experiments was not far-fetched. It actually happened. And people that use that as their reason, they're valid in how they feel. But I would respond to that in saying that even though that was a terrible period in the history of our country, the medical community, it's a blight on just how, as civilized society, and the treatment of how people were treated in those days. But I would like to think that we've progressed somewhat away from those days and have evolved to a community that can be relatively trustworthy. All right, especially since when you liken the way that the shape, just the physical, literal shape of our medical community compared to today, we have a lot more people of color who are a part of the process of bringing the medical community along. So as opposed to a time where we were excluded from being
Right.
a part of that community.
Yeah.
So we actually have insiders.
Right.
And so
Right.
in order for a conspiracy like that to happen again, then you would have to have our insiders in on the joke as well, if for
Exactly.
lack of a better term,
Exactly.
you know.
Yeah. And
And so
that can't happen now, because you
it
remember
can.
back in the day when they used to say the ones that was in the house and the ones that was in the fields. Now the ones that was in the house was along with the master now. So, but
Absolutely.
but like
Absolutely.
you say,
But being a former member, I don't think I could do that to my brothers. I could not do that to
yeah,
my
but we
students.
like you say, I'm believing too, Coach, that we have come far from that now, that we're become more knowledgeable. See, at that back then, we didn't have the knowledge or the access to the resources to even know. Because I can remember when my mom would take us to the doctor and she wouldn't ask questions. She would just listen to what the doctor told her, and she just went on with whatever he said, but with my children, I ask
Yes, ma'am.
questions. I want to know why you chose this. What is this gonna do? And how much, side effects are she's gonna or he gonna experience from this particular medication opposed to this. So it is all so refreshing to know that we're more educated in like you say, in the medical field, and now we're asking questions, whereas we used to didn't do that.
Exactly. And I agree with you 100%. And that is pretty much how it should be. You should have the latitude to ask questions. We've created an environment where asking questions seem to be a threat. We have to get past that.
Right.
No, a question is simply just someone seeking knowledge. We want to be informed on what we're doing.
Right.
And that's why information is just so important. And so, you know, we have to teach our young people, especially this new generation of people, that not only should you ask questions, but you should be versed in how to ask the correct questions.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
so in our classrooms, that's what we push. Certainly in our district, that is like the whole driving force behind the things that we're doing as far as a student-based learning. It's to draw inquiry out of students and teach them how to reason the answer. Even reason their way to an answer, or when they're given an answer, how to pass it through the smell test so that you can determine whether or not the information you're being presented with is valid.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And it's the same way with arguments. If you have established a claim, make sure you have evidence to support your claim. So when you go and you talk to anybody, have your facts, so that you will be well versed or well knowledgeable about what it is that you want to know. So that is exactly why you are on here today, because you are definitely knowledgeable in this area, and I just want to thank you so much. And I know that I'm going to get questions, and when I get those questions, I will definitely hope to bring you on live so that some of those questions could be asked as well as answered. So is there anything else for the audience that you would like to leave them with, or to just to think about? Because I always like to do that. I always like for my guests to leave my audience thinking. If not, give them a great takeaway. So what would be a great takeaway for you to let them know something that, something that they can think about?
Okay. Well, I would invite your audience to objectively look at history, and also objectively look at the data from a reliable source. I would recommend the WHO .int website, the CDC.gov website, the NIH.gov website. because these agencies have been the authority on infectious diseases for the past almost century. Okay. And so these are the people that are informing the policies that we have to adhere to in our communities. Right now, what they are giving you is just information. That's it. They inform policies. Our politicians are the one that take that information and then they implement that in their communities the way that they see fit. So, we don't want to muddy the line between what is objectable, verifiable evidence and the way that it is being implemented by media and our politicians. I would submit that you go directly to the source and attempt to extrapolate that data yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can't, find someone who's versed that can do it for you. Somebody, there's got to be somebody you trust. You can go to almost any teacher, science teacher, or any educator that may be versed in just taking data and reading it, and and could give you kind of a comprehensive explanation of what we're looking at, what we're confronted with. And so science and objectivity can always be challenged, and it will stand up to any questions that are being asked. Anything else, questions, and that's how you can determine whether or not what you're hearing is true. And so question the sources, question, and just ask questions. And so that, I guess, that would be my best advice as far as what to tell your audience. I'm not the authority on this issue. Like I said, I understand what the authorities on the issue are saying.
All right. All right. Well, guys, you all heard it here. Thank you, Coach.
Thank
Please
you.
don't forget, guys, to comment, to share, subscribe most definitely, and like, because I know this information is so valuable. Now you have an opportunity to take what he has said, think about it, ask questions. If you have doubts about anything, like he said, don't be afraid to ask questions. So again, thank you all for joining me and Coach here today with Exceptional Talk with Dr. Clark. All right, guys. Bye.
Thank you
Until
for
next
having me.
time.
All right.
Bye.